Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Once again, Joe Nice, live and direct. Should have done this a couple of hours ago, but I'm a busy guy, allegedly. I have stuff to do, like grocery shop, and work out, and read books, try to find work, try to stay as healthy as I possibly can. You're probably wondering why. Joe, why do you have a mask on? You're by yourself. You're indoors. What the hell is the problem, Joe? Are you sick? No, I'm not sick. But I am tired, and I'm sick and tired. Stop killing black people is what the mask says. It also says underneath, defund the police. Defund the police. I want to make sure everybody understands what I'm going to talk about today for as long as I feel like talking about it. If you want to jump on and have a discussion with me, by all means, please do so. I am here. I am here. I am here. I am here. Today is March 3, 2021. I hope everybody understands what happened on this date 30 years ago. And if anybody wants to jump in and comment, feel free to. I'm all eyes and ears. If you want to Google it, go right ahead. If you want to talk about it, go right ahead. But I'm going to share this with you. I'm going to share this with you. On this date 30 years ago, Rodney King got beat by the Los Angeles Police Department. I'm going to say that again to make sure everybody understands what I just said. On this date 30 years ago, Rodney King got beat by the Los Angeles Police Department. He was struck by 4 officers with batons 56 times. 56 times. 56 times. On March 3rd, 1991, King was beaten by Los Angeles Police Department officers after a high-speed chase during his arrest for drunk driving on Interstate 210. An uninvolved individual, George Holliday, filmed the incident from his nearby balcony and sent the footage to news station KTLA. 30 years ago today, Rodney King got beat by the Los Angeles Police Department. And if not for a video tape, he would have been beat and there would have been no repercussions for it. And as a result, an all-white jury ended up not convicting the 4 officers of savagely beating Rodney King. Then people wonder why April 29th, 1992 happened, when the verdict was administered. The entire city of Los Angeles burnt up in flames. Tyler Hawkinson saying, my guy, my brother Tyler. Speaking of Tyler in Minneapolis, sometime next week is the Derek Chauvin trial. He was one of the 4 officers involved in the murder of George Floyd. There are blocks and blocks of security fencing and jersey walls around the courthouse, I think in Hennepin County in downtown Minneapolis. I want to make sure I'm crystal clear with what I'm saying now. This is not the George Floyd trial. This is not the George Floyd trial. This is the Derek Chauvin trial. Because George Floyd didn't kill anybody. George Floyd was the one that got killed. And George Floyd's only crime was trying to pass a counterfeit $20 bill. But in the eyes of those police officers, George Floyd's crime was being a black person living in the United States of America. That was his crime. And he paid for his crime with his life. He paid for his crime with his life. I'm going to keep reading about this Rodney King situation because many of you all that just decided to figure out, oh, yo, who's this guy Joe Nice? I know he plays dub plates, all right. But what else is he about? About this stuff too. I want to make sure everybody understands that there's a bit more that's happening outside of where you are than where you are. At a press conference announcing the 4 officers involved would be disciplined and 3 would face criminal charges, Los Angeles Police Chief Daryl Gates, who is a steaming racist, we said we believe the officers used excessive force into taking him into custody. In our review, we find that officers struck him with batons between 53 and 56 times, end quote. The Los Angeles Police Department initially charged King with felony evading, but later dropped the charge. And if you remember the post-trial press conference when he left jail, he was in a wheelchair. His face was all busted up. He had bruises all over his chest, and he had stun gun marks from where the police officers used a stun gun that was 50,000 volts. Thankfully, it wasn't 50,000 watts, because he would have been dead after 50,000 watts. 50,000 volts. They stuck him in the chest with it. The 4 officers were eventually tried on charges of excessive force. Of these, 3 were acquitted, and the jury failed to reach a verdict on 1 charge for the 4th. 3 were acquitted, and the 4th officer, they couldn't make a decision on whether hitting a black man when he's down 56 times with a baton is excessive force. They couldn't figure that out. Today in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Police Department is 4 times more likely to stop black drivers and 4.6 times more likely to kill black people. The Los Angeles Police Department has a budget in the billions of dollars. I think their budget is approaching $6 billion for their police department. Billion with a B. So when people talk about saying defund the police, defunding the police is not new. It is not new. It is not new. This March 3rd, 1991, I was, let me do the math, I was 14 years old. I was 14 years old. My birthday is 2 weeks from today, actually, March 17th. 2 weeks from today, March 17th. And if you're feeling generous, I'm a large t-shirt, size 12 shoe, 33 waist. And I remember talking to some people who I knew in high school and went to grade school with. And they were like, yeah, Rodney King deserved to get beat. Yep. Yep, it was justified. Needless to say, I don't associate with those people anymore. 30 years ago, there were riots in Los Angeles, and that city burnt to a crisp. And I feel sorry for what happened to Reginald Denny, because he didn't deserve to have a brick thrown at his head. But you know what? Rodney King also didn't deserve to get beat by 4 police officers and struck with a baton 56 times and have a stun gun put in his chest and 50,000 volts of electricity burning him. And I feel sorry that all of those businesses in all different parts of downtown Los Angeles got looted and destroyed, and insurance companies did not pay for any of the damage. I feel terrible about that. But you know what else I also feel terrible about? I also feel terrible about a group of white mobsters destroying Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I feel terrible about the police officers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, destroying a neighborhood. Look up Operation Move. Kenneth Neal, one of the greatest Canadians ever, saying, "Speak the truth, talk that talk." Tyler, Minneapolis is going to burn up, fam. Today's March 3rd. Today's March 3rd. And I'm going to make sure that we get this done right, too, because I'm going to make sure we talk about this because it's important and it matters. And her life mattered, too. On March 13th of last year, Breonna Taylor was killed by 4 white police officers. Remember that? Remember when everybody had, hey, hashtag Breonna Taylor. And everybody put black squares on their Instagram. And everybody was marching in the streets saying, say her name, Breonna Taylor, say her name. Then it was George Floyd, then Ahmaud Arbery, then Walter Wallace Jr., then Jonathan Price, then Rashard Brooks, and Jacob Blake, who got shot 7 times in his back. "30 years later, what are we talking about? The same shit. And nothing's truly been done about this. Nothing. For those of you who are wondering, hey, you know what, Joe, whatever happened to Rodney King? Is he still around? Is he still alive? How come we haven't seen Rodney King at these protests? What happened? Where is Rodney King? Rodney King has been dead for 9 years. That on June 17th, 2012. So almost 9 years he's been gone. He was found dead in a swimming pool, face down in the swimming pool. Eric with a Q saying truth. Karina with 3 hearts. Eric with a Q saying those days were painful. These days aren't much better. Shit. Worse, probably. We're still seeing people gunned down, black people being gunned down in the street by white police officers. Just last week, there was a black man who was walking across the street, jaywalking. The cops even said on videotape, yo, come on now. Well, we don't need to be doing this. Then they ended up shooting him. Kurt Reinhold. Kurt Reinhold. That happened a few months back, actually September of last year. But the videotape is just now being revealed to everybody. And without that videotape, what do you think the police officers would have said? Oh, well, you know, he was black. He had drugs on him. We suspected him of a crime, and he reached for a gun, and we had to shoot him. So when you see people in the streets marching and fighting for these 4 fights, humanity, freedom, equality, and survival, and this t-shirt is forthcoming, wait for it. I'm going to make it available to everybody. And the name of this t-shirt's called The Four Fights. "30 years later, Black people are still having to deal with police brutality. From March 3rd, 1991, me being a 14-year-old kid, turning 15 years old, freshman year of high school, at Calvert Hall College, the greatest high school of all time. This country is beyond redemption. It's beyond redemption. There is no fixing this. There is no reforming this. There is no, hey, you know what? Let's reboot this. Control Alt Delete. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. When an apple orchard continues to produce bad fruit, you don't question the individual apples as to why they turn up rotten. You look at the tree to figure out why the trees continually produce spoiled fruit. I'm going to make sure I say that again so everybody understood what the hell I just said. When an orchard continues to produce bad fruit, in this instance apples, you don't look at the apples and wonder why the apples are always bad. You look at the trees that continually produce bad fruit. And if the trees continue to produce bad fruit, you get rid of the trees from the roots. You don't chop off a limb. You don't pull off a branch. You don't grab a couple of leaves and burn it and put it with some sage and smudge your apartment or your house. You uproot the motherfucker. You get rid of the entire tree. And you find better trees. Trees that will not produce bad fruit. What I just described to you is what needs to happen with police departments across these United States. They must be uprooted, not trimmed back or manicured or shaped up. Get rid of all of them. So when that mask I just had, where I said defund the police, that is what needs to happen. What also needs to happen is strikes across these United States. So what we're seeing right now is that the United States federal government does not give a shit about anybody. And everybody that said, hey, Joe Biden's our guy, let's move him left. How's that working out? How's that working out for you? I'm not working now, so I got nothing but time on my hands, and I can wait for an answer. How's that working out? People are out here are fighting for a $15 minimum wage. And they started that fight 10 years ago. And a $15 minimum wage was inadequate 10 years ago. It is even more inadequate now. If the minimum wage was supposed to be keeping up with inflation and worker production, the minimum wage would be approaching $26 to $28 per hour. And in some states, a $28 minimum wage would still not be enough income to afford a one-bedroom apartment. Tyler saying the whole United States government as a whole needs to be uprooted. Shit's been rotten from day one. Could have said it better, brother. Justin Getz saying this is one messed up place. Brown versus Education. That would be the Board of Education, and that happened in 1954. That's correct. Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954 desegregated schools. And we have pretty much the same racism and racial profiling happening today. To me, it says the government and justice system are the trees producing these bad apples, as you put it. Praying hands emoji, white thumbs up. That's it. A rather undiscussed part about Brown versus the Board of Education. Brown versus the Board of Education also, yes, it desegregated schools. But what it also did is it made teaching, the teaching profession, almost exclusively a white female occupation. Why? Because when you desegregated schools where you had black teachers teaching black children, you had white teachers teaching white children, you also had to have white teachers teaching black children and black teachers teaching white children. What happened after that? Many of these teachers unions said, wait a minute, I don't want Lucille, this black lady named Lucille teaching Susan and Steve. Can't have that. What happened? So white teachers, white women specifically, formed teachers unions. And teachers unions are quite powerful. And as my sister Kat and I have said on many occasions, we discussed this in the employment episode of the Joe and Kat Chat series. I'd say about a month or maybe a month and a half ago, we talked about unions. And I said the two strongest unions in America are police unions and teachers unions. The two strongest unions in America are police unions and teachers unions. And in many instances, the police unions are controlled by white males, and teachers unions are controlled by white females. And if you want a fight on your hands, go ahead and mess with a teachers union. Fuck around and find out. See what happens to you. And I know this from personal experience because my ex-wife was a white lady and she was a former middle school principal in Baltimore City, and Baltimore City's teachers union is second in power to the Fraternal Order of Police, which is Baltimore City's police union. The same Baltimore City's police union that backed the 6 officers that eventually killed Freddie Gray back in April of 2015. We're coming up on 6 years of that. The entire city of Baltimore went wild for a week, and it wasn't enough. And I'll go ahead and share my memories about the whole Freddie Gray situation a little bit closer to when the date of the incident took place. There's a lot to discuss with that. Tyler, and like you said, I couldn't agree more. I don't know if there's anything that anyone can be done. Even if we were to shut it down, I feel our social structure altogether has been poisoned for so long. Correct. Our social system has been poisoned for so long. The reason our social systems have been poisoned for so long is because the cultural institutions that make up society have been destroyed completely. Additionally, and I'm going to go a little nonprofit on everybody here, the two types of what's called anchor institutions. These are institutions that communities have a tendency to build themselves around. The two types of anchor institutions in the United States, well, there's really 4, but in nonprofit speak, there are 2. You have hospitals and you have colleges and universities. In the philanthropic sector, and using philanthropic jargon, people say eds and meds. Eds, colleges and universities, meds, hospitals. Take a look at the disintegration of colleges and universities around these United States. and the exorbitant cost of getting higher education. I can certainly speak to the exorbitant cost of higher education. Why? I have 2 master's degrees. One from the University of Baltimore, one from this fine institution, Wake Forest University. And my student loans are somewhere in the $175,000 to $180,000 range. No idea how I'm going to start paying those back. Take a look at the healthcare system in the United States. And I've spoken about the healthcare system ad nauseum and at length on all of my social media outlets. And how the United States healthcare system is a for-profit cartel. And how caregivers and medical professionals employ what's called the defensive practice of medicine in order to make sure that they do just enough to not get sued by their patients. And as I've said before, and I'll say it again, the United States healthcare system, otherwise known as the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, pejoratively known as Obamacare, is a Republican health care plan. When Mitt Romney was governor of Massachusetts, the people of his state approached Governor Romney and said, Governor Romney, we need a health care plan. Mitt Romney consulted a right-wing think tank called the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation came back with what is called a 3-legged stool model of healthcare. The 3 legs of the stool are access to insurance, government subsidies, and a fancy rule called the individual mandate. It worked excellently on a state level because you had cost controls. As a result, there were more people participating on a state level, so it worked wonders in Massachusetts. On a federal level, it was total shambles because you have multiple ways in the United States to get health care. Multiple ways, depending on your socioeconomic status and your social status. For example, my parents are old. They're on Medicare. I don't have health insurance. One of my younger brothers is not a high-wage earner. He's on Medicaid. I have another younger brother who's retired Air Force, spent 20 years and 8 months in the United States Air Force. He is on TRICARE. And if you think Medicare is good, try getting on TRICARE. TRICARE is outstanding. It's the military healthcare system. My younger brother pays. He's married with 3 kids and he has a dog. And his wife has some compromised health issues. And he's paying $154 every 3 months for his wife and 3 kids and himself for health insurance. Basically a little more than $600 a year. If I were to buy health insurance right now, I'm not paying $600 a month. It's probably more like $700 or $800 a month for health insurance. In addition, Tyler, the social structure, the 4 institutions that every community should have, every functioning community should have: a hospital, a school, a bank, and a grocery store. The 4 institutions, once again: a hospital, a school, a bank, and a grocery store. Take a look at how many people since this pandemic have been unable to buy food, and all the food pantries and bread lines that you're seeing across these United States. Kat and I did an entire episode early on in the Joe and Kat Chat series about food insecurity. And we discussed the differences between a food swamp, a food oasis, a food desert, and we didn't actually discuss this term, but I'm going to bring it up anyway, a food mirage. You're like, well, Joe, whoa. Y'all didn't talk about that in the episode. What's a food mirage? A food mirage is when you, the consumer, sees a grocery store that has fresh food options, and a grocery store that has the 7 types of food to qualify it for a grocery store. The 7 types being dairy, poultry, meat, fish, fruits, vegetables, and breads and grains and or cereals. Those are the 7 types. Now, there's all sorts of different rules that you have to have regarding refrigeration, spacing, etc. But if you have those 7 types of food that I just mentioned, technically you are a grocery store. Food mirage happens when you, the consumer, sees the grocery store, but you can't afford to buy the food at the grocery store. That is a food mirage. And we're seeing that happen in a lot of communities also, in addition to the expansion of food deserts. And Tyler, you wonder why our social structure has been poisoned for so long. There are millions of people right now who would love to get a stimulus check, but guess what? They can't cash it. Why? Because they don't have a checking account or a savings account. They are what's called the unbanked. Then there's a certain sect of those people who have a checking or savings account, but their credit is not good enough to qualify them for low interest rates or low cost financial instruments. They are called the underbanked. In addition, the underbanked live in areas where there are no financial institutions that could administer any sort of financial transactions. So what are they left to do? They're left to go to a local liquor store, grocery store to buy a money order to pay rent. Or they're going to an ATM to withdraw $20 to buy groceries, but they're paying $4 for the service fees to withdraw $20. Famous author Barbara Ehrenreich, and she's an excellent follower on Twitter, said years ago, it's expensive being poor. She also said that being poor is one long emergency. Man, Ranch, we got a nice episode coming up next week about the dissolution of institutions on the Fear and Loving podcast. And we're going to dive deep into that. Good to have you aboard, brother. Richard's saying we got to be relentless in our demands for a compassionate and non-corrupt management for all of our institutions. We can't let up just BC. I assume that means because we don't have enough of us yet. Stay focused. I couldn't agree more. In addition to being relentless for our demands for a compassionate and non-corrupt management of all our institutions, one of those institutions that demands and requires compassionate and non-corrupt management, one of the institutions is the largest institution in the United States government. We need people in the government that represent the people, not the 1%, not the elites, not the billionaire class. We need people in the federal government that represent John Q. Public. But unfortunately, since this pandemic has taken place, John Q. Public has all of a sudden become John Doe or Jane Doe. Because our government is more interested in bombing Syria than making sure that we have healthcare, instead of making sure that we have healthcare. Our federal government is more interested in making sure that Raytheon gets $280 billion before the United States unemployed gets a $1,200 check and some measly unemployment insurance money. Our federal government is more interested in locking up brown people at the border instead of the federal government actually making sure that everybody has a living wage in this country. And a living wage in this country is not $15 an hour. It is not. Because $15 an hour was an inadequate minimum wage 10 years ago when the fight for 15 actually began. Quite honestly, the fight for minimum wage shouldn't be a $15 fight. It should realistically be more of a $30 fight. It should be a fight for 30. A fight for 30. And if all of these people in Congress, up to and including Bernie Sanders, is continually fighting for $15 and saying that we need a living wage, he of all people should understand that a living wage is unlivable under $15 an hour. Why is nobody in the federal government fighting for considerably more than $15 an hour? Why is nobody in the federal government fighting for $30 an hour? We have the Congressional Budget Office that can crunch all the numbers and make all of the figures and come up with all the statistics to justify why $15 an hour is necessary. You mean one of these people's campaign staffers can't look at the same data and say, well, wait a minute, yo, this 15, come on, you can't do $15 an hour that's unlivable. You think any of their campaigns, you think any of these Congress people or senators, staffers are making $15 an hour? Nope. Nope. And I guarantee you, you couldn't live on $15 an hour living in Washington, D.C., or in Prince George's County, or Montgomery County, or Fairfax County, or Prince William County, these are all the surrounding counties around Washington, D.C. You're not making, none of those people in Washington, D.C. on the Hill are making $15 an hour. Why is nobody fighting for significantly more than $15 an hour? The fight should be for 30, not 15. DJ Deep Sound saying, easy, Joe. Easy, brother. Good to chat with you the other day. Ranch saying, screw Walmart. Yep. Forever. There's a documentary. You can watch it on YouTube. It's called It's called The High Cost of Low Price. I think that's the name of the documentary. The High Cost of Low Price. It's a documentary about Walmart and how most of Walmart's employees work part-time hours, so Walmart doesn't have to pay for health insurance, and how most of the Walmart employees end up on food stamps or some type of nutrition assistance program, which is administered by the state and means tested. And I'm going to not say food stamps. It's called the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, otherwise known as SNAP. And it's means tested. And it's based upon, I think, the federal poverty limit that the Department of Health and Human Services sets every year. It's means tested. So if you're an individual, you're going to get less money on your SNAP card per month than a family of 8. If you make a certain amount of, you have to make, there's a certain income threshold that you cannot exceed in order to qualify for SNAP benefits. And again, this Joe Biden-led government is more interested in oil subsidies than making sure people have food subsidies. When I mean food subsidies, SNAP cards. And for the life of me, I don't know why why nobody in the federal government is talking about this. There's a whole bunch of money being given for unemployment. Piles of money being given for unemployment. And eventually the bill will get passed, hopefully soon. Why is nobody trying to expand SNAP benefits to everybody who is receiving unemployment benefits now? Why is nobody talking about this? So instead of spending unemployment money, a chunk of unemployment money on food, you can spend that unemployment money for living expenses, and then you have a separate card just to buy food. And you expand SNAP benefits to be used at farmers markets also. I know they do that here in Carborough. I know they do that with the Chapel Hill Farmers Market. Durham, North Carolina has a magnificent farmers market, and I know they do that there also. Why not? It's an excellent way to support local farmers and local artisans and local food manufacturers. It puts money back into the local government. It promotes healthy diets. And I'm not saying that people who receive SNAP benefits don't eat healthy. But if you want to promote healthy eating, you want to promote consuming locally grown produce and other locally grown products, A farmer's market is an excellent way to do that. Plus, you get to meet people in your community, and that doesn't stink either. And it's Wednesday. The farmer's market's taking place where I live, right up the street. It's a wonderful farmer's market. There's a wonderful vegan Latina vendor. The name of the vendor is called Soul Cocina. Their food is excellent. Oof. The plantains are outstanding. So are the tamales. Rag saying, stoked for our Talk Tuesday. Absolutely, brother. You already know what it is. I've said all I want to say for today. That's it. Today's not March 2nd, it's March 3rd. I didn't change the date over because I was so angry earlier today. And I still am. If you want to learn more about what I do on a day-to-day basis, as I continue to try to rescue some sort of meaning from my life and try to do something as impactful as what I've done with music over the past almost 2 decades, find me there. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube at JOENICEDJ. Not hard to find. If you like what I do, tell a friend. If you don't like what I do, tell me. My direct messages are always open. I do my very best to make time for as many people as I possibly can in the time that I have available, which is crazily now a lot of it. Also, if you're interested in this shirt, Humanity, Freedom, Equality, and Survival. I mentioned these are the 4 fights. These are the 4 fights that people are continuing to have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. This shirt will be made available soon. There's a website being built for merchandise. And it's not going to be just gourmet beat stuff or stuff with my face on it or name on it. No. It's going to be stuff like this, because this is more important. Hope everybody gets an opportunity to reflect on everything that I just said over the past 44 minutes.